Will the U.S. attack Iran again, or can a diplomatic agreement be reached? That is the question being asked in capitals across the globe after a round of indirect talks wrapped up today in Oman. Iran's foreign minister called the talks a very good start, but the Trump administration's repeated threats and military buildup in the region have many questioning whether an attack is imminent. Here to discuss, Niall Sainage, White House columnist here at The Hill. Hey, Niall. So what is your take away from these meetings? Was there any progress made? Does it mean anything that the Trump administration is not really commenting?
I do think it is significant that the Iranians and the Omanis have suggested that there has been some progress, or at least a sort of favourable atmosphere at the start of these talks. Because obviously the fear, the concern was that these talks would take place in a very strained atmosphere and would end up in immediate confrontation. So that doesn't appear to have happened. Having said that, you're right. As you and I speak, the United States government has not commented on these talks. That's obviously a massive question mark hanging over things. And there's a whole other lack of specificity, which I'm sure we'll go on to talk about exactly what is being sought in these talks. And that's a big part of the picture too.
Yeah, and considering the maximalist demands of the Trump administration, they want Iran to abandon its nuclear and ballistic missile programs. Is there even a deal that could be made? Like, could they come up with a list of things that Iran could agree to that would satisfy the American negotiators? Would those programs not be seen as, by the Iranian regime, as essential to its survival?
I think they quite possibly would be, and I also think that if the Iranians were to agree to dismantle or destroy such programs, it would be perceived as a humiliation for the leadership of Iran. Now, it could be maybe that the leadership is in such a weak position that it would agree, but most experts in the region think that is highly unlikely. I mean, tension or the ability to stand up to the United States is one of the things that is an absolute rallying cry for the regime in Tehran. So the idea that they would give up, for example, a ballistic missile program in addition to any elements of its nuclear program, that does seem, I think, a big stretch.
If the U.S. does decide to take military action, what options are thought to be on the table, and what capabilities do the Iranians have to respond?
So one issue there is the nature of an American strike would depend in large part on what the American objectives actually are. We know, of course, that President Trump had talked about intervening on the side of the protesters in Iran when those displays of dissent were at their height. He didn't do so, and it would appear that the Iranian regime, with some brutality, has survived those protests, certainly, and basically got past that issue in large part for the moment. So does the Trump administration want to strike again at kind of weapons facilities? Would it consider striking the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, for example, in a way that was seen as a specific attack on the regime rather than the broader Iranian population? Iran does have a large military, but the other point is, would an American attack in fact serve to solidify Iranian popular support behind the national leadership in a way that is obviously not the case right now?
Can you talk a little bit about the concerns that the United States delegation and the president have heard from Arab allies in the region and where that concern stems from?
It really stems from the fear of there being a broader regional conflict. So we've seen even rather close American allies talk about the fact that they wouldn't allow air bases to be used and things like that. They don't want to be seen as cooperating if there is an American strike on Iran. I think the danger for them is this sense that it could perhaps spur a broader regional war. Those American allies, they do want stability in the region. Now, of course, they are no friends of the Iranian regime, but I mean, essentially, it's a devil-you-know kind of scenario. Is it actually more fostering of instability to have complete chaos in Iran rather than a regime that you dislike?
In other nuclear proliferation news, President Trump says he will not extend a major nuclear arms treaty with Russia. The program is called New START. Signed in 2010, the treaty was designed to cap the number of deployed nuclear warheads and launchers. What do you make of this program being allowed to expire? There was reports of a plan to extend the limits for 1 year, but reportedly the president turned that down.
Yeah, I find it curious in one respect, which is not many people are against nuclear non-proliferation. So letting this treaty expire in that way seems somewhat peculiar. I think the way to make sense of it, perhaps, is the president's broad skepticism, really, about what other people would call the rules-based international order. He's very much a sort of go it alone, America first, all of that. So it is, I think, to many people, a worrisome decision to let this treaty lapse, but I do think it sort of fits to some extent into Trump's worldview as he has articulated it, not just on this topic, but on many other topics.
And President Trump says he wants to actually have a new treaty with Russia that also includes China. What are the prospects for that in the current geopolitical climate?
Well, as we were just discussing, very challenging, I would say. I mean, you're talking about then having a more complicated agreement with another major power, and you're beginning this from scratch, essentially, because you've let the other treaty that we were talking about with Russia lapse. Obviously, every potential nation in that agreement brings its own priorities, brings its own tensions with the other nations involved. Maybe it can happen. We've learned not to rule anything out, but you have to say there are a lot of hurdles to be overcome before you would reach a successful conclusion in that regard.
Yeah, major questions if a long-term deal with the Americans could be reached, considering kind of an oscillating back and forth between administrations and kind of reneging on agreements that have been put into place. So something that we will continue to follow. But for now, we'll leave it at that. Now, Stanage, White House columnist here at the Hill. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Drew.